Hey everyone, welcome to this session. As a quick reminder, please silence all electronic devices, no audio or video recording, but photos are allowed if you want to take a quick picture of a slide or anything to remember that and take it home with you. That'd be great. My name is Cody Mortensen. I'm the lead product designer at story.com. I've worked there for about 2.5 years and it's been awesome and we're really excited to be here. If you want to contact me for any reason to follow up on this presentation or ask more about Storied or my role there, you can contact me at cmortensen@story.com. Quick little tidbit about me. I am a Utah native. I live in Layton with my wife and two children. I have an almost 4-year-old son and a 6-month-old baby girl and love them so much. You'll see some of my family in this presentation as I talk through parts of my own story. So Storied, like I mentioned, that's our company. We're a new sponsor this year, and we're really excited to have hopefully most, if not all of you, check us out and add your own story. So the title of my talk today is Getting My Family to Engage with Family History. I think it's pretty common that in a family there are maybe one or a few people that are really interested, really put a lot of work and time into researching and documenting and creating remnants of your own history, past and present. And it might be tricky to get other people involved. So today's discussion is a lot about little tips and tricks on how to maybe make it easier for others to engage with the work that you're doing, because this is all, it's important. And there are so many beautiful stories and things we can learn about our families that we want people to share and learn. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So to start, I'm going to go with some tips and tricks on ways to get people to engage. And the first one is to try and keep stories very short and concise. So this example here is actually an excerpt from a 13-page PDF autobiography of my great-great-grandfather, Christian Wilhelm Mortensen. Being completely honest, I still have yet to read all 13 pages, but I have read a few pages and I was able to pull little tidbits of things that I really love learning about him. I was able to find out in this little excerpt here, you can see where he grew up, and he shared a memory of his dad, Anders, and how from the time he was born to the time his dad passed, he worked for the same farmer named Lars Hansen on Kalahave Mark. And so I Googled Kalahave Mark and I was able to find that street here in Denmark. You can see the street view, and that was pretty cool to be able to kind of virtually walk around this road that my great-great-grandfather and his dad, my great-great-great-grandfather, third great-grandfather, spent a good amount of their lives. It's pretty amazing. And so rather than like hoping or expecting someone to read this entire biography, you can pull out interesting short stories to share. And that's what I did here. So at the beginning, I added a little summary where it says Christian, his brothers, and his father worked in farming when living in Denmark, finding work, being hired onto other people's lands throughout their lives. In Christian's own words, my father worked from the time I can remember until the time he died most of each year for a farmer by the name of Lars Hansen on Kalahave Mark. And then it goes through, and I added a few other excerpts from that portion of his own recounting of his life. And it's just much easier to engage with this because it's short, quick to read, less intimidating than a 13-page PDF, and it's very easy to share, which is what this is all about. Another benefit of short, concise stories is they're really quick and easy to write. So that previous example was from an ancestor of mine. This example is one from my own life. So this literally took me probably 5 minutes to track down these pictures and write this quick story. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it to kind of show how short something can be. It doesn't have to be long. So this one's called Hatch's First Ramp. I grew up skateboarding, rollerblading, scootering, biking, building dirt jumps, skate ramps, you name it. Since Hatch could stand up, Hatch, my son, I've tried to pass on my love for bikes, skateboards, scooters, and really anything he can ride. We try to get outside to ride every single day. We can't go into our garage to go anywhere without him asking if he can do a quick loop on his bike. When our house was being built, one of Hatch's favorite things to do was skate in our unfinished basement. We have a lot of leftover wood from finishing our basement earlier this year, so this weekend, Hatch and I built his very first ramp. It brought me back to hours in my driveway as a kid, building and trying out ramps from any scrap wood I could get my hands on. Um, so this is like it's a small moment in my life, but just like my great great grandfather can write about a memory of him and his dad farming on Callahave Mark, I can write about a memory with me and my son skateboarding and riding bikes in our driveway, and it just takes a few minutes. Um, the next tip I have is photos really encourage engagement. So you'll notice in those stories I shared before, I didn't have a photo of my great great grandfather, but I did pull out something from the story and found those maps to add a photo to kind of help visualize what is being discussed in the story. And then obviously that last one, I had a photo of my son and I to illustrate that story as well. So what I have here is a quick little slideshow of a bunch of photos, about 20 seconds long. What I want you to do is just watch this and see if anything comes to mind, if there's a photo that reminds you of something from your own life or something that you could write your own story about. We'll go ahead and watch. Okay, I know those go really quickly, but every time I watch that, I try and think of something new. So what came to mind for me today were two photos. One was the picture of the Christmas tree. So growing up, I always had a fake Christmas tree. That sounds negative, but they were great. I'd have a a boxed up fake Christmas tree in the basement that we'd set up. I never did a real tree. I never knew what that was like. Not saying I missed out on anything because real trees are a lot of work sometimes, but it made me want to write about the first time that my wife and I and my son went out and got our first real Christmas tree. And I think that's becoming a new tradition for us. And then the other one that stood out was the Halloween group of kids. And one of them was dressed as Captain America, and my son Hatch is obsessed with superheroes. And I think it kind of prompts some stories I can think about with uh, Halloween or him and I playing together. So it's kind of fun things to think about. Um, we'll move on from there. Oh, it's going to play again. There we go. All right, so another slide on photos encouraging engagement. So every single one of us either has a box of photos ourselves or has a family member somewhere that has boxes of photos just stacked that have so many stories to be told about them. So this is one, at least for me, is kind of infamous as I think of stories or photos from my childhood. So I'll go ahead and read a quick story I wrote about this one. So this is called Ear Infection Smile. My entire childhood, I was prone to ear infections. I've had tubes inserted multiple times over the years. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I had an ear infection that was severe enough that it pinched a nerve, causing half my face to go partially paralyzed. I'm not sure if this was a school picture that prompted my parents to get me to the doctor then, or if they arranged this photo shoot to capture my memorable smile at the time. I do remember it being my first hospital stay as a kid. I don't recall much outside of it being scary and my dad staying the night with me. This photo is now used as a meme, often by my wife in group text conversations. It always sparks a good laugh. And so late, like that was really fast and quick and easy for me to write about. I wrote what I remember. I don't remember a lot about when I was 5 or 6, but this did prompt some fun conversations with my mom and dad. I sent this to them, and they let me know their own memories or perspectives. So my mom shared one little tidbit, and then that prompted something for my dad. He was like, "Oh no, wait, I think this is how it happened." And then it went back and forth a little bit, and it turns out that I had this school photo taken. Um, my parents, I think, were kind of unaware that anything was going on at the time, but with school photos, you don't get the photo back till weeks later. So at home around this time, my sister was like tickling me or something and saw that my laugh and smile was kind of funny. So she told my parents, they took me to the doctor. It was kind of a pretty quick emergency trying to figure out what was going on. And I stayed the night in hospital. And then a couple weeks later, when we got my school photos. This is the result of it. I think they had retakes because I don't think this ended up in the yearbook, but it did end up on story.com because it's a fun little story about this photo. So I guess the gist of it is use those photos, like dig through what you have or what others have and find what resonates with you and write a story about it. And get those scans so that you can share them with your family. The next tip is just everyone has photos on their phone, like scroll through once a week, every day, once a month, whatever cadence it is, scroll through and see if there's anything that prompts a memory that you might want to capture. So as I was doing this exercise myself, I was scrolling through and I saw these pictures on the right. You can see pictures of the motorhome. So I haven't written about this yet. My wife has created like a really beautiful book about this, but I need to get this added to my own tree on story. But in 2020, during the beginning of the pandemic, we were my son had recently turned 1. We were in lockdown essentially. I was working from home. Like it was very, I mean, not everybody here knows it was a weird time. We ended up purchasing a 1987 Class C RV, um, and it was a Fleetwood Tioga. And because of the Fleetwood sign on it, we ended up naming her Stevie Nicks. And um, just a quick little bit about that. We fixed her up and we went camping as much as we could that year, and it kind of became this sanctuary for our family in a really hard, interesting time in our lives. And that fall, when we went camping, our son called our RV Stevie and called every other trailer and RV that he saw around Stevie. And so now whenever we see RVs, it's just like, oh, look, there's a Stevie, there's a Stevie, there's a Stevie. It's pretty fun. So that's a story I still need to write. But just scrolling through these photos makes me remember why that is significant to me. And I want to preserve that because it really was such an important thing for our family. Um, if you don't have photos for a particular story, you can go and find one. You can use stock images. Here's a list of a few different stock image sites that you could use: Pixabay, Unsplash, Commons on Wikimedia, 123rf.com. And there's just so many resources that you could do. So, I mean, you don't have to have a photo. You can write stories about anything. It doesn't have to have a photo, but photos do help pull you in. It encourages engagement, like the slide says. So this first example on the left is from my coworker, Heather. She was telling a story about these like circus peanuts she remembers as a kid from her grandma. And she says, looking at this photo, she can still smell and taste them. And that's kind of like what the photo can do for you, is it really can bring even more senses and memories into the story itself. And then this next photo here, my dad wrote a story about his first guitar. I played guitar growing up because of my dad, and we played a lot together, but I personally never knew when or what his first guitar looked like. So I really loved that even though he didn't have his own photo of this, he was able to go and find one and add it to his story. Brings it to life for me. The next photo type thing we can do is take photos of heirlooms that you might have. So important family heirlooms, keepsakes, recipes, souvenirs, really anything that is of significance for your family. And so here's just a few examples. On the left, this is from my coworker, Heather. She loves like family old Bibles or old like family documents or embroideries. And this is one that is a kind of a family history of a family in her tree. So there's like parents listed and children, and it's embroidered really beautifully. So she took a picture and wrote about this one. The second photo of this green trunk, as I was preparing this talk, this one came to mind. I was like, oh, I remember my mom posted a picture of this on Facebook and was asking people about it. So I went and hopped on Facebook, found that post, and asked what people remembered about it. So this is my great grandpa's like tool chest. So I never met him. He died when my grandfather was about 16, I believe, in like 1956. And so my mom never met him either. So there are like very few things that we have of his. And so each one is really precious. But I was able to find out this was his tool chest. He worked as a finisher and a painter in California. And my grandma added that she remembers painting this chest green 50 years ago. It lives in my mom's home right now, currently tucked away so that grandkids like my son don't break it. But it's pretty special that we have something physically and here digitally a remnant of it to remember my great grandpa that a lot of us have never had the chance to meet or know, but we have stories about him, which is amazing. This last photo on the right wasn't intended to be an heirloom photo or story, but I sent this picture to my mom and was asking her about her grandma and grandpa in this photo. And so she told me a little bit about him, but the first thing she actually said was, "Oh, hey, that's the piano." I was like, "Wait, what? The piano?" And turns out the piano in this photo was the same piano I grew up playing in my own home. So I asked my mom about it. I was like, "Oh, how long did they have it?" And it turns out there was a story behind that. So my mom, when she was about 12, her parents put her in piano lessons and bought her this piano. And she learned on it. And then me and all my siblings learned on it. And now it's in my sister's home where her kids can play on it. And so they're just little things of objects around us that have their own stories that we can take pictures of and capture them and write about it. And I think it's really, really exciting to learn those things. If you don't have a photo, another option is create one. So AI is kind of a new emerging thing, but one of my coworkers, Brandon, does this all the time. So he has awesome old family stories that he has that have been passed down. This one is titled Candle in the Window. I don't remember the details of the story, but I think the gist of it was that um, people were like trekking home, and there was like a lot of hope once they saw the candle in the window as they were making their way back to their home. And so he went to an AI generator and typed in a description of what he wanted, and it came up with this this illustration to represent his story. And he's done it with all sorts of topics. It's pretty fun to see what he can come up with. Another way that we can use photos is newspaper clippings. So on story.com, we have billions of articles, and there's plenty of other resources you can find too for newspaper clippings. So here are two examples of stories that I have written about clippings I found. So the first one on the left, my grandpa was mentioned as the best man in this photo, and I was like, oh, who are these people? If he is the best man, they must be pretty important. So I just did a transcription of the article as the story, and then my dad ended up commenting about how Larry, pictured here, and my grandpa were really good friends in high school, growing up in Smithfield, and it was able to kind of spark a conversation about my grandpa, who was recently passed a few years ago. This next one on the right is my grandpa's dad, my great grandpa Victor, who owned a coal company, and he was driving his truck down the road, and a car with teenagers like riding on the front bumper behind him swerved and hit his truck. So he was at no fault because he's just this big truck just minding his own business, but he was part of this fatal accident of these teenagers in his town. And I took that clipping, added it as the image to the story, and transcribed it, and also just added my own little tidbit of like, man, I wonder what that experience would have been like if you're not at fault, but you're part of this really sad story. I wonder what he felt. And I hope that um, other people can engage and kind of learn this little thing that I didn't know about my great grandpa. It probably isn't something that he really talked about a lot, but there was a newspaper article about it, which is cool. Records are everywhere in family history, right? So this is another thing that you can use to write stories. I think that most people that aren't into family history or do a lot of family history would see this census record and not know where to start. So one thing I did here was I found the 1940 census shown, and I also found the 1950 census as well, and highlighted where my family showed up in that record and wrote a little story about it. So wrote how, hey, in 1940 they lived here, they were this old. My grandpa worked at this as a finisher for a automobile manufacturer in Los Angeles. And then 10 years later, they lived 7 miles down the road to the east. And he was then working as a painter for a water heater manufacturer, which is this photo you can see here to the right. So with this story, I kind of was able to pieced together like their movements over that 10-year period, and also was lucky enough to have a photo that shows where he was working as listed on the 1950 census. So going to transition gears just a little bit. So moving on from photos, I'm going to get into like different levels of engagement. So this is specific to story.com, but a lot of this is applicable across wherever you document your things, whether it's on a blog or another ancestry site, wherever you do that, I think these things can be applied. But this one right here is specific to what we have on story.com. So different levels of engagement that we've been building and working on, which has been fun to use. So the first one is liking. So to create this story, there are lots of people that don't really have much to add, but they can come in and they can read your story and they can like it, let you know that they saw it and appreciated it. So you can see this particular story, the one about my ear infection, funny smile, has 9 likes here. You can go and click on the 9 likes and see who has interacted with that story. Personally, it just feels good to see that people are seeing the work you put in. So that's one thing we've done at Storied. Next one is commenting. So one step a little bit further is if someone has something they want to add, they can add their own memory to the story or version of the story or whatever else. So this particular example, you can see I posted this obituary of my wife's grandfather who passed away a little over 10 years ago. And it didn't have a photo with the obituary, but I grabbed one that close to the time that he passed and added it. And I have one comment on it right now. So you can see this comment on the right was from my mother-in-law. She said, "He was always very kind to me. His mother was a nurse, and I think he liked that I became a nurse too. He always told my children that they had a good mother and that they were fortunate. That meant the world to me." And so I think this was really incredible for me because I had only met Shelby's grandpa once, and I wouldn't have known that his mom was a nurse. I wouldn't have known that like this was kind of the relationship that my mother-in-law and him had, and it seemed like it was great. So it was fun to see her little perspective on him as a person. I've also seen commenting really fun with my own family. So my mom wrote a story about a trip that they took just before I was born to Hawaii for my dad's business trip, and it wasn't a Hawaii vacation like you would hope for, but she wrote her perspective, and then my dad added his own little tidbit and went back and forth a little bit to tell more of the story. So that's a big reason why we think the comments here are important, is because everybody has a different perspective and you can add your own. Next level of engagement we have at Storied is sharing. So really, really simple. You can see here, I wrote a story about that piano in the background of my great grandparents, and I can hit the share button, enter in an email, hit share, and it's as simple as that. Somebody will get an email saying this story has been shared with you, and you can click the link and go and view the story. And then if they register on the site, they can like and comment and interact and create their own. That's pretty fun. So another thing that we have built at Story, which is unique to Story, and which I'm very, very excited about, is groups. So you can like, you can comment, you can share, but then you can ultimately create a private group where you can invite members of your family to come and add their own stories, read your stories, do whatever else you want there. So a couple benefits of groups on story.com is they are private, safe, and secure space for you and your family. Only the people you invite have access. So they'll be able to see your tree and add stories of their own and be able to view any of the records or stories that you have saved there. So this is on the right. It's kind of what groups looks like in your navigation. So you can see it's not just family groups. You can see there's one my coworker had made for disappearances and discoveries, where she finds really interesting newspaper articles and shares them here. And it's fun to see the activity of people I don't know that come in and read the article and be like, oh, I found this other tidbit about this person. And they kind of craft their own stories about these articles they find. And then you can see I have 2 family groups and the Storied team of my coworkers as well. And then another nice thing is we do have like a vanity URL. So you can see for Heather's Disappearances and Discoveries group, it's story.com/group/disappearances and discoveries. So each one is unique to your own group. Another benefit that we have on Storied is the ability to customize it a bit. So you can see here, you have a name, an image, a description, and you can see the shared people you have in the group. So you can see right here, my Mortensen family tree has 411 people. My family members that I've invited can go in and see those people and see all the photos and records and stories that I've added and add their own as well. Another small piece of groups is being able to see who's in the group. So the member list, I mentioned Heather created this disappearances and discoveries group, and I don't know everybody in it, which you can see. There's me right there. There's Heather, who's the sponsor or the creator or owner of the group. And then there's Donna, Evan, Kathy, Laura, a bunch of other people that I don't know, but I can see their activity in the group because I'm part of that group. So one thing to note is it is a secure private space. So I can't go and see everything that Kathy is doing in her other groups or on her own if she has private stuff, but I can see what she comments or contributes to this specific group since I'm a member. And then this is just a view of my own family group. You can see me and my parents and my siblings. Since I know all of them, I follow them as well. And another nice thing is you could see pending invites that you send out. So if you send an invite and somebody hasn't joined, you can go and check and see, oh yeah, they haven't accepted it yet. And you can resend it or reach out to them to have them come and join your group on Story. We did a quick poll at our company of like, what are, like, we asked people who've been using the product, what are some ideas of groups that you could create that aren't just your family? And the possibilities really are endless. There's sports teams, friends, congregation, high school, youth group, fellow passengers of a certain voyage, college friends, roommates, all sorts of things. Personally, for me, I have 2 family groups, excuse me, my work group and that disappearances and discoveries group, and I'm sure there's more that will come in the future. So another tip or thing that we've been building at Storied, and there's this part of this is going to be Storied features, and part of it's going to be just tips that you can do outside of our product, is story starters. So when you come onto our platform, you can either click on like my stories and see all the stories you have, or you can click on individual people and see what you have there. But we have these things called story starters. And so the purpose of these is one for like organization, and filtering down your stories. So you can see this example here. This is from my coworker, Heather. She has 190 stories, 192 stories. And so scrolling through all those could be kind of difficult. One way that we organize them is through these category tags. If she has a story she wants to find that she had written about her time as an English teacher, she can click on the education one and filter down to that. These also kind of act as prompts. So you might see, I mean, Heather, as an example again, she told me how she worked in education for over 20 years, and she only has 8 stories that have to do with education. And compared to what she has for possessions or, whoops, or challenges, like she's like, oh man, I have 20 years worth of stories. I should have more than 8 stories about education. So it can kind of prompt you to think, oh, what could I write about my relationships? What could I write about when I've moved or had immigration stories of mine or my ancestors' lives? And we're constantly working on different ways as Story to make it easier to help you think of things to write about, because everybody has stories every single day of their life that they can contribute and fill in the gaps of your life with these different topics. Another thing you can do to find ideas for stories is follow other Storied users for inspiration. So in the member list on the groups earlier, you saw that I was following some people and not following others. So that's something you can do, is if you follow somebody on our platform, you'll see as they add new content, new stories, they'll show up in your feed, and you can click and go and see all of the public stories or stories shared with groups you're in to give you ideas on things you can write about. So you can see myself here, 68 followers, 54 following. I can click on who I'm following, and it'll show me a list, and I can go and view their stories that they've written to get ideas, or just interact and like and comment and do whatever else I want on the platform. Another thing we have is something called featured stories. So when you first enter the platform, occasionally they'll have stories that are labeled featured, and they'll show up in your feed as kind of like a fun story of the day or story inspiration. So you can choose when you join story to follow that or not if you don't really want that in your feed. And then this last one is just an example of if I were to click on Eric from my people I follow list, I can go and there I can see those story starters and see all of the things that he's written about. His are hilarious. He does such a great job finding old family photos and adding them here and adding his own point of view and asking lots of family members to add their own as well. And you can see he's been hard at it. So he's got 177 stories here, 145 of them about relationships. So he does a lot about his family members, which is fun. Another tip on how to get started with writing stories is following Storied on social media. So our marketing team and our in-house specialist, Heather, is very active on all these platforms. She tries to post almost daily. So you can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook for ideas to get you writing your own stories about your family history. I'm going to go into a few other resources here just to kind of give you more ideas on places that you can go to find inspiration. So the first one is Family Search. Well, I'll show you the list of links here. So there's Family Search, Teach Me Genealogy, Preserve Your Tree, Create a Family History, Historian, and Pinterest. So I'll have a slide for each of these. So the first, Family Search, you can go and search hashtag 52 stories on Family Search. And they have put together so many different ideas for things you can write about. And so you could choose to write 52 stories in a year, do one a week. That's something that I've been trying to do at work and at home. But you can see here on Family Search, they have 52 stories for goals and achievements, love and friendship, occupation and hobbies, home and earth, mothers and motherhood, fathers and fatherhood. List goes on and on. There's really what feels like a never-ending supply of ideas on things you can write about, which is awesome. They're a great resource. The next one is teachmegenealogy.com. She has done a really awesome job putting together 52 weeks of genealogy herself. So she did a post a week for a year and has lots of different cool story ideas. So this one you can see on the page is like your favorite family vacation. That's something I don't think I have written about or really considered. So that's one thing I should do myself. Another one is Preserve Your Tree. So this one is kind of about interviewing grandparents or other people, and you could do the same thing and interview yourself. So 80 plus great questions to ask when doing a grandparent interview. So things like, were you named after anyone special? What were your parents' names? Where are your parents from? When were you born? Are your siblings older or younger? All sorts of things to just really get a broad stroke of a person's life. And then I think a lot of these get into details about specific memories, which is great. So that's Preserve Your Tree. Next one is Creative Family Historian. And so she's done something similar. The last one was 80 questions. This one is 260 family history questions to interview yourself and others. So go and check her out as well to get all sorts of ideas on things you can write about. And then the last one is just search on Pinterest. This is a great source for story inspiration or really anything to help you get ideas on how to document things for your family. So that's a really helpful resource as well. I wanted to end with a few quotes and a few thoughts. So the biggest thing that I hope you get out of this is just like just start. Like the biggest thing is it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be complex, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just start. And this quote I think says it well, where it says the history of the world is not complete until your story is told. It might not feel like your stories are significant enough to document. You might think that you should only be researching the past, but I think just like this says, like your story is important, and until it is told and documented, there's something missing. So go and write your own stories. This next quote is a little sad, but I think pretty true. It says it only takes 3 generations to lose a piece of oral family history. This was research done by the National Archives and Records Administration. So I even think about this myself. Like my grandpa has passed, and then I have my dad myself. So that's three generations. I think it's pretty easy for stories about my grandpa to be lost if they're not documented. So that encourages me to really want to not only do research of people past, but document what I know now and the family relationships and stories I've experienced in my own life. So to summarize, tips and ideas, don't be afraid to start. Just get going. Write every week. Use a journal or notebook for ideas. So um, I use my phone a lot. I'm kind of a to-do list person. So if I think of something, I just add something on my to-do list and say, hey, go write a story about XYZ. And sometimes I will like schedule it for far into the future, and then it'll pop up and I'll be like, oh yeah, I wanted to go on story and do this and write this story. But write things down. Start with what you know. Like, don't feel like you have to know everything about something. Like that example I shared earlier about my ear infection hospital trip and the funny smile. Like, I don't remember a lot, but I started with what I knew, and then I was able to get other perspectives from my mom and dad on what they remember about that experience too. I still need to talk to my sister because she was part of that story as well. And then make a list of stories to tell. So I shared tons of resources. You can pull from those lists, or you can, if things come to mind, just make your own list of things you'd like to make sure you write about, um, whether it's about your own life, your kids, other family members. Just write things down. Another tip and trick is ask other members about photos. So I mentioned Eric earlier, who had like almost 200 stories in that image I shared, and he does a great job of just pulling old family photos and asking everybody he knows about this. My mom's also great at this. She'll post photos on Facebook. This is one of them. This is my grandma right here in the middle, my mom's mom, and she'll ask what people remember about, like who's in the photo, what do they remember, and so from this, I was able to learn that this is my grandma and this is her best friend. I think her name is Georgie May. So they were childhood friends, lived on the same street, and Georgie May ended up being part of my grandmother's wedding, 18 years later or something like that. So that was fun to learn. But there's all sorts of stories behind every photo you're able to find. Um, don't worry about spelling and grammar. I personally use Grammarly, or even just will write in one place and copy it to another and help myself with grammar. English isn't my strong suit, but don't worry about it. Like these can be casual, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect. It just matters that it's recorded. And write the way you speak. I am kind of guilty of not doing this sometimes. I think it's like trying to make it like the story has to like flow in a certain way, but just write how you speak, because I think people in the future that come would like to understand, oh, well, this person wrote this story from their own voice, and this is kind of who they were or how they sounded. So just try to do that. Um, One tip is making a timeline of major events, like as an idea to get like the juices flowing. So you can, I've done this on my own time with like different places I've moved or jobs I've had. Um, I documented like a timeline of those things, and then I can kind of fill in the gaps and think of stories that I might be able to write at those points or things in between. I think that's something that could be helpful. Writing in list form. So this is something that one of my coworkers was talking about, is she'll sometimes be like writing a story out in like paragraph form or like story form, and then just get to a point where she just like wants to list events, or things that she remembers about something. So it doesn't have to be a story that has a start, or a beginning, a middle, and an end. It can just be like, here's things I remember, and have some bullet points. And even that is great to be able to share or preserve. Another tip is like giving some historical perspective. So I mentioned this one earlier with the RV. Like the reason that this RV was so impactful and special to me and my family was that it was during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when everything was shut down and we like didn't feel like we had anywhere to go or travel to. So we had this nice little encapsulated experience inside this RV with me and my wife, our dog, and our at the time 1-year-old son, Hatch. So this was kind of like local perspective, and it could be global perspective as well. And this other example is maybe a story that you're documenting about an ancestor took place around the time of like the Titanic, for example. So something that can be really fun is finding that time period and going and searching on Storied or elsewhere and finding out what was happening locally in the newspaper at that time and that place. And it could give you some different perspective that you might not have thought of beforehand. Gathering memories from other people is the one we've talked about. And just making it a habit to write. So I'm still working on this one. I guess kind of setting a goal on like, I just want to sit down and write one thing a week, similar to those 52 story ideas that you saw on Family Search and those other websites. You can get to the end of the year and have 50 stories. And if you do that a few years in a row, you're going to have an amazing documentation about your own experiences and others that you can share with your family. Another tip is maybe ask questions as part of the story to engage the reader. One story I did this not super explicitly with, but as I was writing about my grandfather and the coal truck accident, I posed a question of like, I wonder what he would have felt like. And I think that can get the reader to engage in a different way, to like really sit and ponder like, oh yeah, like this, what would that have felt like? What would my reaction to that experience have been? And that can also bring up different ideas on experiences they have in their own lives. So I think that could be a fun way to engage people in the stories that you're writing. Um, Another idea is just to turn facts into stories. So one can be occupation. So my coworker gave an example of a like a bobber was listed on a census, and so she found this link and went and like looked up what that job actually meant. So there might be interesting facts you find in records that lots of people aren't going to pay attention to the records, but you can go and turn that record into something more tangible and understandable for the average reader. Another one is addresses. This is one I really like to do. So with the 1940 and 1950 census that I found for my great grandparents, I looked up like San Antonio Township in Los Angeles and found their house that they lived. And then I looked up Downey, Los Angeles, and saw the map that they just were 7 miles down the road. And then I would do the street view and go and look. And then this was the other example from my great great grandfather farming in Denmark. So like I searched on Google, I came in, found that he lived, I don't know how to say these, but Langebach something, lived in this area of Denmark, zoomed in and was able to find that street and the farm and went on the street view. And I'm able to add some of these photos and try and take some of those little details like addresses or occupations and bring them to life with um, photos or other resources that you can research. Just as a review, like make it short. Don't try to write in chronological order. So sometimes I think with the biography thing that I talked about at the beginning, it's great to like line up things in chronological order, like events that give you ideas to write, or even you can just write a bunch of stories that one's at the beginning of your life, one's at the end of the life, one's in the middle of your life, and later on you can order them. But don't feel like you're restricted by that. And focus on living memories too. I think for me, I'm definitely more of an entry level family historian. I've done a little bit of research, but a lot of what I'm able to share is living memories. And one thing I think that is great about this is as your family sees you sharing living memories too, and not just things from the past, I think that can get them engaged to share their own. And all of our descendants and people in the future will benefit from this. Think of what you wish you would have known about your ancestors, write about that for yourself. A couple other little resources that you can check out is first is Write Your Family History with Natalie Pithers. And she does a great job just kind of helping you think of really fun ways to write your family history. So you can see the headline here is How to Go from Boring to Brilliant Family History Writing. It's a resource I encourage you to check out. And then the last one is 20 Reasons Why from New York Public Library. So why you should write your family history. And I'll just go to those links really quick, at least the second one. And you can see here, some of them are kind of funny reasons, but there's all sorts of reasons to write. One is you'll feel wiser. Um, you and your family are important to somebody, probably many somebodies. I think that's something to remember is people love you and want to know about you, and they might even be people you'll never met in the future. There's all sorts of fun reasons why you should do this. And then this last slide is something that as we were doing research in the early days of Storied, which is still the early days, but a year or two ago, we are doing a lot of research with random participants throughout the country, trying to understand like what would matter to them um, for their family to know. So I posed this question. I said, if your great grandchildren were researching your life, what would you want them to know? Um, and some of their answers kind of surprised me, and they were all just like so beautiful. But um, some of them, like it wasn't about dates and places and like I did this thing then. It was more about who they are. So it was, I want them to know what I cared about. I want them to know how much I loved my family. I want them to know my character, and things that were important to me. And I think those type of attributes, I think, can really oftentimes get lost. Um, you don't find those in records. You don't find those in a lot of stories, but like you can write that for yourself. So I encourage everyone here to think about that. If someone 50, 100, 200 years from now was researching me, what would I want them to know about me? Who am I? What did I care about? How did I love the people around me? I think there's a lot of beautiful stories that can come from this question. So write that down so they can find that out. Thanks.